Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. So I got to tell you, I went to a bunch of events, not in the last year and a half, because we haven't had a lot of events in the last year and a half, but prior to that, I went to a bunch of events, and this one gentleman would show up all the time on the runways and at different events, and he was the coolest guy you'd ever want to meet. He always had a great tan. He always was wearing sunglasses. He had this incredible white hair. He was always very fit, which bothered me immensely. He was so good looking, and he was inspiring. And he was just Mr. Cool. And I got to tell you, I've always wanted to chat in greater depth with Henry Calderon, who is a fashion icon. For the last 7 years or so, he's become a feature on the fashion runways of Toronto and in Latin America. He's a fashion management consultant. He's an influencer in the world of modeling and design, and he drives very hard outside of the fashion business as well, because he's a big tennis player, and I've seen him on Facebook and Instagram playing tennis, and he's a polo player, and I've seen him up on top of the horses playing polo, both in Toronto and in Peru. Henry Calderon, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
I'm doing just great, Brian. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. I got to tell you, you have always inspired me. You've been such an interesting fixture at so many different events in the Toronto area. And I'm always jealous at how cool you are and how good looking you are and how fit you are. You're my hero in that regard, I got to tell you. So tell me, how did you get involved in the fashion business? How did you get on the runway?
Well, the interesting part is that on the early sort of stages of my career, I was in the world of real estate development, and I was with Campo Corporation, and we built Scotia Tower, Harbor Castle, the hotels, hospitality industry. And as the company moved their head office down to Toronto, I had an opportunity to stay with them long enough to find out other opportunities in Toronto. And one of them was revitalizing neighborhoods. And within the program of revitalizing neighborhoods, one of the areas where we were pretty much very, very interested in is bringing the world of arts, fashion, and film. And with that, it came the modeling industry, it came the designing industry. Designers started moving into small neighborhoods. They were the mom and pop operation for argument's sake, and then they became pretty well known. So that's how I sort of became really interested in the fashion industry.
Tell us a little bit about your backstory. When did you come to Toronto?
Well, I moved to Toronto back in late 70s. Campo moved their head office to Toronto, and they needed a sort of a flagship operation in Toronto, and that's when I moved to Toronto in the early 80s.
From where?
I was in Ottawa, and Ottawa was sort of my home base for about 10 years, and prior to that, I was in British Columbia, in Nelson, BC, while I was doing my university studies up in Notre Dame, the home of the national ski team. Nancy Green came out of that school.
Oh, really? I thought you had come from Peru more recently, so it was a long while ago that you came from Peru.
Well, yes, I came to Canada when I was 18 years old, going to university up in Notre Dame, up in Nelson, BC. So I've been here now close to or a little bit over 50 years. And
where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Lima, Peru.
And where did you start playing polo?
I didn't start playing polo until really here on my later sort of a part of my life. When I was around 46, that's when I started riding horses. A friend of mine who had moved from Alberta, I went to school with his brother. He had a farm, and his kids were all great equestrian riders. And they said, "Uncle Henry, you gotta get on the horse," and that's how it started. And
tennis is something you've done your whole life?
Yeah, tennis is something I had all my life since I was in Lima, in Peru. We had great facilities around the neighborhood where I lived, and there was always public courts, and the parish where I was part of it there were French Canadians, and they have a tennis court inside their company.
And I got to ask you, why always the sunglasses?
Well, the sunglasses became sort of a part of my personality that I started developing. I kind of got sort of liked it. I hear some great stories about sunglasses that you can probably drop about 10 years out of your life. And I don't know, it just became a natural feature for me.
They drop 10 years out of your life. Sunglasses do.
Yes, absolutely. You ask anybody.
Really?
Oh, absolutely.
I'll have to put some sunglasses on.
Oh, but you have to wear them often enough to feel comfortable with it. And people will get used to with you with sunglasses. Some of them, they want to see your eyes, but you know what? When you take your glasses off, my eyes are kind of like a green kind of thing. And once they get to see them, like, oh my God, you know, why do you have to wear sunglasses? I don't know. It just became part of my personality.
Because you're so cool. I always think, you know, President Biden always taking the aviator glasses on and off looks so much cooler. And so you're probably right that it takes some years off your life. We're chatting tonight with Henry Calderon, an icon in the fashion world in Toronto and in Latin America. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Henry in just a minute. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. It's a real pleasure of mine to chat tonight with Henry Calderon, who is one of these gentlemen that I've always admired in the Toronto sort of society circuit. He's always at different events that I've gone to. He's a model on fashion runways. I didn't realize until we chatted tonight that he had quite the real estate career with Campo in Ottawa, British Columbia, and Toronto before he got into the fashion business. He's also a polo player. He's also a tennis player. And he's just a really cool guy. And so he's always someone that I've admired as he's worked his way through different events. Henry, let's talk a little bit about fashion. So you've gotten involved in the fashion business and you're a consultant. Tell me, what do you think are some of the trends in fashion? You have always been a very sort of smart casual dresser, I think. Do you think that smart casual is what the future is going to hold for guys, or are we going to go back to suits and ties, or what's the future?
Well, one of the I think one of the critical trends and patterns that we see now is that it's more acceptable to see people not having to wear a tie or a white shirt to be able to walk into meetings and make presentations, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the designers are now coming across creating styles that they are very comfortable, that you can wear them on Main Street and you can wear them on an evening dinner meeting that you may have. So there is something about the styles and the suits that are now being created that you can feel comfortable about wearing a pair of jeans with a nice jacket and a nice pair of shoes and not feel that, oh my God, I need to have that three-piece suit.
I understand that you're a management consultant in the fashion business, and you've been involved in fashion, not only in Toronto, but in Latin America and elsewhere in the world. What do you think Toronto needs to do to become like a Paris or a New York or a Milan in the fashion world?
Well, I think if we were getting very close about 5 years ago into the sort of a realm of being given the credits that Milan, New York, or Paris do get, and we were attracting some super international designers to Toronto. They wanted to be here. They wanted to bring their designs here, but we just didn't have the infrastructure for them to feel comfortable to have some of their collections. Now, one of the things that I came to realize is that some of their garments were very, very expensive. $5,000 to $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 garments. Without you need a demographics, without you need that group of buyers who actually, or people who goes to Paris, who goes to New York, buy those beautiful dresses in New York, but they could buy them in their own backyard here in Toronto. So we were attracting in conversations that we have with them to come to Toronto, like at the Karl Lagerfelds of the world. They came to Toronto, but for them to be able to bring a $200,000, $300,000 collection, it would have probably cost about $1 million to put it together. And we just didn't have the kind of budget.
What do you think the city or the province could do to help the fashion business in Toronto?
Well, one of the areas that became very important when we lost, let's say, for argument's sake, the Toronto Fashion Week, is that it was giving Toronto a brand for fashion. And the city of Toronto immediately, as soon as that group decided to exit Toronto, came in with sort of secondary groups to help them to be more active with their show, have more elegant shows, better produced shows. And so governments do have a very, very strong responsibility and relationship to the shows, and it brands the city. Believe it or not, a lot of people say, like, Paris, New York, they're branded because of the fashion. Toronto still has a long way to be branded as a fashion city.
What does it take? Does it take Toronto Fashion Week, or what does it take to be branded as fashion?
It takes to bring the top international designers in Toronto. They are the ones who, it's like they're like the movie stars up in Hollywood. And if they came to Toronto with their collections and people were able to realize that, those brands that you are buying and paying quite a bit of money for, they're here in Toronto, you get to talk to them, you get to see their collections, you get to attend to their events that they put together. I think that's what Toronto will probably become, what we want them to be.
When I think of Milan or Paris, they've got, the local designers, the major fashion houses that are there. Don't we have to have our own domestic, local fashion designing business to become a global center?
Absolutely. And what's happening with our local designers, they're finding themselves that, Toronto is not big enough for me to be able to be known around the world. So they go to places like Italy, and they start creating their collections in Italy with the hopes that eventually they're going to come back to Toronto. So, it's like anything else that we've done here in Canada with the sports and everything else, is that we need to have sometimes our designers to learn how things are done in Europe, for argument's sake, because there is so much history in that part of the world. And they come back with those great ideas. They come back more of a sort of that Renaissance designer. And I think that's how we're going to be able to have those top local designers becoming international designers, and at the same time having some of those top designers who are in Europe say, hey, you know what? Welcome to Toronto with Christopher Bates and everybody else. Stefan Carras is a great example.
I've seen you on runways in Toronto. Have you also graced runways in Paris, Milan, New York, etc.?
No, I left Europe alone for argument's sake. Europe for me was going to London, England, going to the Canary Islands, and being, primarily on vacation. That's kind of like where my times in Europe were. And, when I went riding horses up in Ireland.
Riding horses in Ireland. Sounds good. We'll come back to that. But then you've modeled in Latin America as well?
I have been working with some of the designers. I've been asked to participate in Lima Fashion Week with some of the designers who are the local designers to be able to showcase some of their brands. So I'm working on that.
Is there a center of fashion in Latin America?
It is coming. And I noticed that in the past 5 years that I've been traveling quite a bit. And I go there every couple of years as a rule. And I noticed that there is a lot of European designers putting their home bases in Latin America in Lima, because what was happening is that we started building state-of-the-art shopping centers, like the Jordale Mall, like the Eaton Center. So when you have that kind of infrastructure, you're able to bring those kind of designers with their collections and their products. But you need the space. You need that store that's going to be able to showcase their work. And that was happening quite a bit in Lima.
Really, that's interesting. I never would have thought Lima was the place. I would have thought Buenos Aires or somewhere in Brazil would have been the center.
Well, they were, but somehow when you look at Latin America today, Lima became kind of like the hub for everyone to land first in Lima before you go to Rio de Janeiro, before you go down to Buenos Aires. So Lima just decided that this is great for us. Why not?
Sounds good to me. This is great for us. What's it like being the star on a runway?
Well, it's a personal satisfaction. It's a personal level of confidence that you develop. And not only that, I think one of the critical things that I see, even myself, when I get invited to showcase some of the brands in some of the fashion shows in the runway, is that I have the ability to show how well that garment is being designed, how well that shirt is being designed, that you have the feeling for it. It's a great feeling.
What do you think it takes to be a top fashion model, a top male fashion model?
Well, I think one of the critical things that I've seen is the dedication and commitment. And that goes with discipline, because a fashion model today have to keep himself in pretty good shape. The exercise component, the diet component, all those elements, and look healthy is a critical path. Besides of being, photogenic, or even sometimes you wouldn't know someone walking the streets of Toronto or Paris in New York that this man or this woman is a top fashion model, because it's as natural as it can be. And I think that's the beauty of it, of most of those top models.
You're incredibly fit. What do you do to stay fit?
Well, I do quite a bit of exercise. I run, I walk, I play a lot of tennis. I'm always pretty active, and that's one of the key things that I been able to sustain over all my life. Is staying pretty active 24/7.
But in addition to that, and this, just cool nature that you've got with your look and your glasses and your hair, etc., you've got charisma. Where does charisma come from?
Well, I think it's part of your DNA. I think most people look at themselves and how they interact with people. Yes, you could walk into a room, be noticed as soon as you walk into that room, but you are very calm about it to ensure that it doesn't get to your head. And that's one of the key things of most sort of superstars, is that it doesn't go beyond being as natural as it can be.
You're not a 20-year-old, and yet you're very successful. Can a female your age be a fashion model?
Oh, absolutely. And I've seen a lot of women who always was in the back of their minds, it was their dream to be a model. What it has to happen to them is that someone has to believe on them and say, here we are, here are the steps that you need to take over the next, for argument's sake, 24 months to be able to feel that you can walk the runways. And let me sort of bring something into the picture. There is a lot of designers right now that are looking at the demographics and saying, where is the majority of our customers? And the majority of our customers are between that age of 45 and 55 and 65, and they're entering, some of them, the workforce, some of them, they're entering different fashions in their lifestyles, and they're looking to find that amazing dress that they can wear. And they also can find themselves that, hey, I can walk the runway. I would love to walk the runway. And I think the more fashion shows we have, and the more they attend to it, in the back of their mind says, listen, I could do it. So when we create this sort of a charity events where there is an opportunity for them to walk the runway, we should be, open those doors as many as possible.
We're chatting tonight with Henry Calderon, a fashion model, a fashion consultant, a former real estate developer, a polo player, a tennis player, a very cool guy. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Henry in just a minute. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Henry Calderon, who is a fashion model in Toronto. I've always been impressed with him on the runway and at events. He's a avid tennis player. He's a polo player. He's in incredible shape. He's always wearing shades. He's got this charisma. He's a consultant in the fashion business. Used to be a real estate developer. Henry, you've lived quite the life.
Well, when you look back and you say, hey, you know what, over these 5 decades, how your journey has been somehow designed, and you continue to look at sort of what the future is going to be like, and with everything that you've done, yeah, you can write a book. You can say to yourself, here are some examples of how I did it, why I did it, and one of the critical things for me was you have to have an action plan, and that action plan always is something that becomes the formula to deliver your likes, desires, and wants and wishes, and be very, very, very normal about it.
How did you develop your action plan? Is this something you do every year on New Year's Eve, or what do you do to develop an action plan?
Well, what you do is you look as to what is happening, for argument's sake, in Toronto, what is happening in the world. And that sometimes becomes, in many ways, sort of your guidance to be able to plan and says, okay, this year, I'm going to do a couple of things different to what I've been doing over the past 5 years. Let's say, I decided to start writing poetry. So the poetry became sort of a part of my, what do I do on a Sunday afternoon between 2 o'clock in the afternoon and 5 o'clock, and it's snowing outside and it's winter. And so I started writing. So I have written about 150 poems. Now I'm in the process of shortlisting the best poems, which were my experiences of being on the runway, or having met someone, or having had dinner with somebody, or having had an interaction with somebody that it was very inspiring. So that allowed me to write a story that I had just experienced. And now I'm hoping that that's going to be, a coffee table book one day.
Really? You've written 150 poems. I never knew.
And they're there. And I have, I have 3 or 4 muses that I work with. And so what happens is that anytime they say something that I find that I can expand on it, and that's how my poems become a reality within that sort of a period of 6 hours.
So we talked about one of the keys to your success is having an action plan, and you use poetry as an example. So what you just dreamt one day, hey, I want to be a poet, or what do you tell us how you decided to be at polo? You at 45, you said you decided to start riding horses and become a polo player. Is it just something that happens by chance, or did you say, you know what, that's cool, I want to do it, I'm gonna become an expert at horse riding and start to play polo?
Well, yes, I mean, you have to be exposed to the game, first of all. You have to get exposed to that environment. And if you find yourself that you can work within that environment and be able to understand, one thing is that you have to start everything from the scratch, from ground zero. So that means you have to take lessons. That means you have to travel around. It means that you have to interact with a lot of people. And then eventually, say, hey, you know what, I'm ready to do it. Like to play polo, you can't just get on the horse and get on the field and play the game. The rules are, you have to, for a period of probably about a year before you can actually interact with 3-4 other players in the field, because it's pretty dangerous. So you have to understand that, there is that level of risk associated with what you're doing, and then be able to understand the mechanics that it makes it work. And also, you have to have a lot of courage.
A lot of courage. So is that another one of the lessons of your life, is you got to have a lot of courage?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like, when I got invited to attend Notre Dame University in Nelson, BC, it meant moving from a big city of, 30 million people, 25 million people at the time, into a small town of Nelson, BC, 5,000 people. And, and one cinema, one hockey rink, one tennis court, but a fabulous school. So you kind of have to feel that the strength within yourself. And on top of that, one of my challenges was that I have to learn to speak English.
So there's something about being a visionary that is part of your life as well, I take it.
Yes, one of the things that everything that I did, and that was part of the action plans that I always put together, and whenever I was working with the communities, is the vision of that leader that was critical for me. And when I saw that behind the scenes that I'm working with a leader that has a vision, then therefore it was very easily for me to kind of like recreate that vision or put it into my own words to ensure that, that we did have a vision. So, visionaries for me are probably the best example of successful societies. And if you look back into the history of many years in different countries, we're the visionaries. And that's where I think the poetry came into the picture, because a lot of poets became the visionaries for their countries.
Really? Poets became the visionaries?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like when you look at it, some of the greatest poets and what they wrote about their society, about their governments, about their people, they were, in many ways, sometimes they were looked at as sort of, they were criticizing their government or criticizing their group or criticizing their society. But at the same time, they were given, within their poetry, they were given solutions to the challenges that was happening at the time.
So you got to have visionaries that can dream that dream like a poet can dream, but put it to words, put it to action, and motivate other people to follow. What else you have to be a successful visionary, a successful leader?
Well, I think one of the critical things is that to be able to have, as you said it earlier, you have to have that charisma. You have to have that sort of a genuine, very legit approach to what you want to do in such a way that, it really passes the test. And people can see it if what you're doing, is not real. And a visionary always find a way to bring the logic into why is it that we need to follow this path.
Fantastic. I think there's a lot of truth in what you said. You also wanted to talk a little bit about events and what it took to make events successful. And you told me that the key to a good events are strong budgets and sound budgets and a strong volunteer base. Elaborate on that if you could.
Well, I think we've seen on other different disciplines that have become successful, and I look at, for argument's sake, the world of tennis. How Canada have become such a powerhouse in the world of tennis. And one of the critical things was, first of all, you build the stadium. Second, you ensure that you have government support. Third, you ensure that you have the right program that is going to be able to grow and create the environment for the generations to come. So at the end of the day, when you have all those elements, are going to help it to have a very successful, for argument's sake, sector, like what we're trying to do now with the fashion industry. And one of the critical things that I always have felt very strong is that it's very difficult for us to put a fashion show together because the venue is never there. It's always very difficult to find the right venue where you can actually, host those shows. So if we will have kind of like a national venue in every city, as we have hockey rinks in every city, we will be able to put those shows because that infrastructure is needed. We don't have it. And I think if we were to able to build that, and taking the example of what happened to the world of tennis, what happened to the world of hockey, when you start building those beautiful stadiums, what happened to the world of soccer, for argument's sake. So with the fashion, I think we need to have that permanent structure that is there with all the facilities that are needed to run a fashion show for argument's sake, 2,000 to 3,000 people per night.
What makes a great place to have a fashion show? How's it different than just a banquet hall?
Well, the difference is that the lighting, the mechanicals, the facilities like washrooms, all those elements, you could look at the Royal York Hotel, the conference center, right? And you can transform some of their rooms into areas for a fashion show, but it's not big enough to host, those kind of events. We've seen it. We've seen it. You can only have the maximum, maybe 500 people.
What's the future hold for Henry Calderon?
Well, I think right now, I see it as my family is growing, and now, they're pretty much, enjoying their careers. I think my goal is to continue in being a good citizen, continue in working in the most unselfish way with all the groups that they need some help. They need some thinking, because the thinking process is critical for them to know which direction to go to. And I think that's my goal, is continue to contribute to society in the same way I did it while I was working, fully employed, to be an advisor at both national and international level.
If someone came to you and said they want to follow in your footsteps, what would you say? What would you say they had to do to follow in Henry Calderon's footsteps?
I would probably say that, if you look back at my, journey, that is something that certainly will recommend.
But what are the things that you got to have an action plan? You got to be a visionary. You got to have courage. What else?
You also have to have great partnerships around you. You have to be surrounded with a group of people who think alike to be able to accomplish all those goals. And that's critical.
Several times you've mentioned about reaching out to people, about learning from people, about the group of people that got to come together. So that's got to be one of the keys, is that you've been able to either meet people or inspire other people to follow you and create a team to achieve the things that you've wanted to achieve, whether it be on the polo field or in fashion or in business, I presume.
So you build a community. It's a community that you build. It's a community that you put together from ground zero, and they all become part of that community, and they see the value of the work that they're doing at the end of the day, because it's something that you start creating a legacy for yourself and for everybody else. And that's probably one of the critical thing for me is, leave that legacy behind, that people can read about it, people can see how things were done. And you're absolutely right. One of the critical things was, you got to have an action plan. Without an action plan, you be going all over the place.
Okay, I'm so jealous of you, though. How do I become as cool as Henry? Do I got to get some sunglasses, or I got to lose some weight? What's the key to your charisma, buddy?
Well, you know what? If you want to be me, you're gonna have to be born. You have to be born in Lima, Peru.
Okay.
In me, you will have to have gone and done all those things for the past 50 years, for argument's sake. If you want to be me as, then, you don't have to be me, but you can be like me within your own skin. And I would probably say that, you can change different styles of glasses. You can change different styles of hairstyles, right? You can feel comfortable wearing anything that you feel, or somebody could say, hey, you know what, that looks really good on you. But it doesn't have to be like, something extraordinary expensive, for argument's sake.
We've been chatting tonight with Henry Calderon, one of the coolest guys, one of the most charismatic guys that I know in Toronto. I've always been interested in him, seen him at different events and on the fashion runways. And it's been a pleasure, Henry, learning a little bit more about you and your polo, your tennis, 150 poems I didn't know about, Nelson, BC. What a fascinating life you've got. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing an hour with us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian. It's been a pleasure.
And I look forward to seeing you on the runway sometime soon. Well, that's our show for tonight, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.960am.ca. You can get all my podcasts and videocasts on briancrombie.com. My videos are on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. My podcasts are on Apple Podcasts, Audible, and Speakeasy. Thanks, Henry. Have a great weekend, everyone.